February of 2019, 125 people in Stockton, California, opened their banking app to find $500 they hadn't earned. No conditions, no forms, no explanation required. The city's 26-year-old mayor, Michael Tubbs, had promised nothing but money, and money is exactly what showed up. Nobody knew what would happen, not the mayor, not the researchers, not the people receiving it. What happened next didn't just surprise them. It quietly rewrote what economists thought they understood about human nature. And the strangest part isn't what the money did, it's what it revealed about you. You've probably heard the warning before you ever heard the study. Give people free money and they'll get lazy. It's one of the oldest beliefs in personal finance. But it isn't true. So when Stockton handed out $500 a month for 2 years, with 0 strings attached, the assumption was simple. People would work less, spend recklessly, prove the skeptics right. They didn't. Researchers tracked every dollar. Full-time employment among recipients rose by 12 percentage points in the first year alone, climbing from 28% to 40%, while a comparison group with no extra income barely moved. The money wasn't replacing work. It was making work possible. It covered a car repair that had been keeping someone from their shift. It paid for the gas that got them to an interview. Nearly 40% went to food. Less than 1% went to alcohol or tobacco. But that's still not the strangest number in this story. That one comes later. In 1974, a small Canadian town called Dauphin, Manitoba ran something similar, then embarrassingly forgot about it. The data sat sealed in a warehouse for decades until economist Evelyn Forget went looking in 2005. What she found quietly contradicted the skeptics. Here's the part almost nobody expects. Milton Friedman, the economist most associated with free market capitalism, was one of the earliest supporters of giving people cash with no conditions attached. He called it a negative income tax. He wasn't arguing out of kindness. He was arguing for efficiency. You've probably assumed at some point that people who struggle with money simply make bad decisions. That if you were in their position, you'd manage it better. It's one of the most common judgments people make about poverty. Almost none of us stop to ask where that judgment actually comes from. In Dauphin, hospitalization rates dropped by roughly 8.5% over 4 years. Fewer car accidents, fewer domestic violence cases, fewer psychiatric hospital visits. Teenagers stayed in school longer instead of dropping out to help support their families. None of that was the stated goal. It was simply what happened when the constant grinding calculation of, "Can I afford this emergency?" quietly disappeared from people's lives. That's the twist hiding underneath every headline about free money making people lazy. Laziness was never really the question. The real question was whether financial stress itself was eating up the exact mental resources people needed to make good long-term decisions in the first place. An economist named Sendhil Mullainathan, working with psychologist Eldar Shafir, gave that phenomenon a name: scarcity. Their research found that not having enough, whether it's money, time, or food, temporarily lowers a person's effective cognitive bandwidth by an amount comparable to losing an entire night of sleep, or roughly 13 IQ points. Not because anyone thinks differently by nature, because scarcity borrows attention from everything else, the way a leaking faucet in the back of a room never quite lets you focus on what's in front of you. Sit with that number. 13 points. That's not a metaphor. That's a measured cost, paid by anyone under enough financial pressure, regardless of who they are. You've probably made a worse decision than usual on a week when money was tight, and quietly blamed yourself for it instead of the pressure that actually caused it. Back in Stockton, a hospital worker named Zona Everett used part of her $500 to pay off bills that had gone unpaid for years. Not to buy anything new, just to stop the calls. Stop what researchers call the poverty premium, the extra cost in fees and interest of not having enough cash on hand to begin with. Being broke, it turns out, is expensive in ways that compound on themselves. By now, you might expect this story to end with a clean, uplifting conclusion. It doesn't, not entirely. Economists Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Duflo, who won the Nobel Prize in 2019 for their work on global poverty, reviewed cash programs from Kenya to India to Stockton and found the same pattern and the same limits. Cash alone didn't build new schools or cure chronic illness. What it did consistently, was buy people the ability to think past the next 72 hours. That's the part that should actually unsettle you. What unsettled the researchers was how much of what looks like a personal finance problem, bad budgeting, impulsive spending, short-term thinking, quietly evaporates the moment long-term thinking becomes financially possible again. The failure was never entirely personal. Scarcity had been rewriting the math the whole time. Think about the last time you were tight on cash right before payday. Did you make your best decision that week, or the decision that simply made the pressure stop? That's the exact mechanism researchers were measuring, just at a smaller scale. Every overdraft fee, every high-interest loan taken out in a hurry, these were never really proof of poor character. They're the symptom of a brain operating at a temporary cognitive deficit. The Stockton experiment ended in early 2021. The follow-up data revealed something researchers hadn't fully expected. Many of the gains outlasted the payments themselves. People who'd used 2 years of stability to find better jobs or pay down debt didn't snap back to their old patterns once the checks stopped. Stability wasn't just a cushion, it was a launching point. Finland ran its own version between 2017 and 2018, giving 2,000 unemployed citizens roughly €560 a month with no obligation to seek work. Employment barely moved, exactly as critics predicted. But reported stress and depression symptoms dropped noticeably, and trust in neighbors, in institutions, in the future itself rose in a way researchers hadn't specifically designed the study to measure. They found it anyway. So here's the question underneath everything you've just heard. If cash alone can quietly restore judgment and long-term thinking to people the system had written off as reckless, what does that say about the judgments you've made, about others or about yourself every time money got tight? Maybe scarcity has just been running the math the entire time for every person who's ever stared at a bank balance and made the fastest decision instead of the smartest one. There is one detail from Stockton researchers almost left out of the final report because it seemed too small to matter. When participants were asked what the $500 had actually changed most, the most common answer wasn't rent or food or debt. It was sleep, not because their bank account had transformed their life, because the leaking faucet in the back of the mind, running underneath every decision, had finally quietly been switched off. In February of 2019, 125 people in Stockton opened a banking app expecting nothing and found $500 instead. What they got back 2 years later wasn't wealth. It was the bandwidth they'd been spending on survival, finally free to spend on themselves. And that was never a story about free money at all. It was a story about how much of your own mind gets quietly repossessed by the fear of not having enough long before you ever notice it's gone.